You're listening to Out Cincinnati on 91.7 WVXU HD2. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Chris.
How you doing?
Excellent.
It's the same intro.
Because our guests are so awesome right now.
No, I know. I'm sorry. I'm working the room, as they say. I'm sitting in front of an aging actress and an attorney. No, it's fine.
Not in that order.
You're right. Michael Chanak and Scott Knox, thank you so much.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, how was Pride?
Fun.
Pride Month, Pride, Cincinnati
I was
Pride.
worn out from it. I'm going to be 70 years old. I went to 4 events, and my left knee is due for a replacement. I felt every step of it, but I did it.
And you get good parking?
You're never too old to Pride.
Yeah. Went to the flag racing that Chris did, and the multi-face service, and, of course, the movie you put on, right?
Yeah, we had a screening of Leela's Highway at Urban Artifact.
And I might point out a couple of these things did have the desired free buffet.
The free buffet.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The quality of a good meeting is when they serve you more than a granola bar.
Just like we have for Mad Llama Coffee today, that free buffet that I'm sure you'll pass on. So, what was your takeaway from Pride this year? The month, the day?
I was struck by, and Mike will probably agree with me here, by this. The change over the years in history, because I remember when we used to, a lot of people don't remember this anymore, but before marching downtown, we marched from Clifton to Northside, and a lot of people remember that, but before that, we marched downtown. There were downtown years when there were maybe 40 or 50 people walking around chanting to empty streets and occasional confused shoppers who would yell
Was it the same? Was it the same route?
No.
Remember Marion from P-Flag was saying that it was like her and one other woman, and they were the only ones out there, and they had a really small crowd.
A very quick history. The first Pride event was 73, and that was, when they say march, they meant on foot. This is before vehicles, right? So that was 73, and they went from Washington Park down to Fountain Square. Then we skip forward to 78. So the period, and this is from memory now, from 78 through 1995, it was actually downtown.
Right.
However, there were no cars in those days in parades, right?
Yeah,
that didn't start until, 2000, we moved up to Northside. Now, someone's going to say, well, what happened to 96, 97, 98, and 99? Call it issue 3. Right? That's a short answer.
But what struck me was I marched with Caracol, and we weren't in the beginning of the parade. We were like number 26 or something, and got down to the Banks and Sawyer Point, and then walked back to have lunch with a friend, and the parade was still stepping off. It was so long.
It's a crazy amount of
me.
interest and entries in that parade. Yeah.
The other thing that surprised me was I thought maybe this year, since it wasn't 2015 with Obergefell, I thought maybe it would be a little lighter crowd than back then, but I've never seen so many people.
I think the 50th anniversary is definitely the thing that drove it.
There was no dead spot on the route.
No.
So it was the Stonewall that you're referring to, right?
Yeah, definitely.
The riots, okay. And is it, I have a little history question on that. They say that the beginning of those riots was somebody throwing a glass against the wall.
Do you really?
Do you know that one? And they said it was a transgender person.
Yeah, the transgender women.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. You have the controversy as to, I am not going to pick a dog in that fight because there is.
And who knows?
Who would know?
Well, no, I mean, if you knew.
We know what groups were involved.
Right, yeah. I just wondered, I mean, it doesn't matter, but the fact that it did start and that all that.
A lot of people did a lot of things. A lot of people changed the stories, then came back to them. And I have seen some very less than constructive discussions in a certain social media I love. I will not engage in that argument. Yeah.
You just look at the photos and see the groups involved. Sure. There was a lot of African American transgender folks and gay men and lesbians. And I don't know.
Pick what you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for folks,
the first brick.
For folks who don't know, what are the Stonewall riots?
Why just a philosophical question. Why does it always have to be who threw the first?
Right.
Yeah, right. I always wonder why in a melee like that.
It's like I started really that clap, right?
And a melee is a good word to describe.
Yeah, it is. I hear some people call it a police action. Some people call it a riot. I was. This was 1969. I had just been beginning my junior year at Kent State. I didn't know about Stonewall until about 1976 when the problems with Anita Bryant popped up. We didn't have that communication then.
No. I lived in New Jersey at the time, and I didn't really know that was going on.
There was no Twitter?
No Twitter. In fact, that's pretty typical of people in my age band. We didn't know about it. The coverage was pretty much limited to the city of New York.
So how did it get out? Did it get out at all, or was it national news?
From the historical accounts I've seen, the press wasn't really all that interested in covering it, except in a very demeaning way.
Exactly. I'd say that's fair. And it wasn't considered much of a, it was just those f***s acting out.
So is why that there's some confusion on the actual goings-on that happened that evening?
Well, these days people would be more engaged. They wouldn't have time to throw a brick. They'd be on their cell phones.
Maybe
that's something I shouldn't have said.
You could throw your cell phone. My cell phone is a brick, right? That's true. So is
bottom line is the quick version is in those days, particularly during political campaign seasons, the police were known to raid area homosexual bars, rough people up, walk in, swing the baton around, maybe arrest a few people. Well, that's kind of the genesis of this, and. There's all sorts of speculation, mafia, other forces, even incling the speculation of Judy Garland's recent death had stirred the gay community.
That was a way of demeaning the
I think so.
A little bit.
I agree,
I wondered.
Yeah.
How is that
somehow we just live for these, figures in the
it was about Judy Garland.
I got so mad Barbara didn't sing my
song.
song.
The silver screen.
Right? So is I always like to look at Pride as kind of a month and then a concept after. It's a feeling that goes all year round. How do you maintain the momentum?
I don't think it goes anywhere. I know you keep asking where does it go after Pride, and I don't buy that narrative, Chris. I feel that Pride, as I see Cincinnati today, and God bless him, Worley Rodehaver, before he passed on, a local journalist, he had counted 550 groups in the 3-state area before he died 5 years ago. There are so many groups now constantly meeting. In fact, I have noticed for the first time in my life where many major events in Cincinnati, as you look at the so-called gay calendar, are now stepping on each other, where there are 2, 3, 4 events in a day. And I've even noticed gay businesses starting to use, quote, sponsored content on Facebook to compete. Where heretofore you would never have seen that.
Oh, you can see that it's sponsored, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of looks like,
Yeah. We never did that before, so it's gotten very competitive.
No, I like that because I try to keep the Pride. I'm talking about momentum. Like I feel so empowered in June. Like I want to put my colors on and everything.
Go out there and
I guess I do that in January.
You do it now. You're doing it right now. We're doing it right now.
People
are listening are doing it right now.
It's always that people will channel it into the election season.
Oh yeah,
people in office that'll. Battle the taking away of our rights.
And you're still involved, before I forget, a plug for Equality, right? You're still involved in Equality as far as the group of people that puts the candidates?
Yeah, the PAC. The PAC is still in existence, and we vet candidates and figure out who's endorsable. It should be interesting this year because there's only 2 people on city council that can run again. So there's going to be 7 open seats, and there's going to be a great crowd of people running for those 7 seats.
Oh, I'm sure that's going to fire up.
Yeah.
Yes,
so we're going to have a lot of interviews, I'm sure.
So where do people find information about that if they're interested?
On the internet, if they just Google Equality Cincinnati PAC, they'll find a website. I don't know if it goes.
There's on Facebook too.
Yeah. On Facebook, yeah.
It comes up all the time. Every year around we always go through this drill about, well, I don't know who to vote, So here it is.
The beauty of it is we've always had these little voter cards that are wallet size. And I always remember, some among us here will remember Bobby Stern, and she was a city council person, and she told me that once she was out and was asking for votes and asked someone she ran into, can I count on your vote? And the person took out her wallet and pulled out the endorsement card and said, I'm not sure, let me see if you're on the endorsement card. So it is powerful because people throw it in their wallet, and so many people, especially with judges, I've found.
Yeah, because they're not marked as to political affiliation, are they?
Yeah, they're not marked D or R.
I found myself in the booth Googling issue.
Exactly.
And that kind of thing. So I almost I love it. It's kind of like a cheat sheet.
It is. No, it makes perfect sense because
you get nervous too, right? I want to do the whole.
But when it comes to judges in particular, you want to know what party they're from and what their history is, and hey, I've gone through that research when I have a absentee ballot. That's one of the reasons I often vote absentee, so I have the time.
A lot of
to
people
do the
say
research.
that that's what they do now.
Yeah, to get the research in.
Okay, so you can sit on the dining room table and
take
say,
as long as you want,
as long as you need,
and plus call people, such as Scott or others. There's a bunch of people in the political scene that are gay that can tell you these things.
Right. Yeah, what's on the card this year, Scott? No, I'm just kidding.
I usually send out kind of an email blast. And initially I thought, well, is this arrogant to do this? Because people are going to say, well, who the hell are you to say who I should vote for? But I really found people appreciate it because, especially as a lawyer, people figure you have an ear to the ground more and you've done the research. And I got a lot of thank you backs from people saying, oh, thanks for giving me a list.
Always used them. In my career as a retired journalist now. Yeah. We always ran that stuff because people didn't know.
And people don't want to mess with the research. And if they, Scott Knox,
and where I can, I'll put in a blurb about each one to say, not just vote for this person because I said to, but vote for this person. Here's a few features they have that make them worthy.
So, Michael, let me ask. I want to ask, and I'll use myself as an example. I have a part-time job. And I have a part-time job in the state of Kentucky. Could I be fired for being gay?
Just a thing. It is still June. It's May or in July. But it amazed me. I saw a study that came out recently, and many things. Studies are like, you can count the stars in the heavens with studies.
For sure.
But one I read was kind of concerning, and it pointed out that a significant proportion of LGBTQ folks thought that they had certain protections that they in fact don't have, and that's one of the reasons I came in today. And I'm so glad that Scott would be here, because it is very concerning not to know where you stand and what the impact of the 64 Act, the Civil Rights Act is, what are at-will states, and all that kind of fun stuff. So where do you want to start?
Yeah.
Well, I think what people need to know is that the fundamental rule is you're not protected if you're fired. And most people assume, they hear that discrimination's illegal, and that's not true.
Absolutely.
Certain types of discrimination, enumerated types of discrimination.
It's nuanced.
You know what it is?
Yeah.
At 62 years old, I still have my Pollyanna attitude that most people are fair. And because of that, most people believe that the laws are fair. So they think, well, of course you can't be fired for something that has nothing to do with your job abilities.
Yeah, right.
So of course it must be illegal. And the fact that it's unfair doesn't mean it's illegal.
Exactly.
So you can be generally fired for being gay with certain exceptions. If you have a union contract, then no, you can't, because union contracts are going to require just cause. If you have a federal government job, you may have some recourse because you have extra rights because of that, because it's government action.
Right.
But if you're working at McDonald's and you get fired because you're gay, you're going to have a hard battle.
Sure you are. It all goes back to the Civil Rights Act of 64, which enumerated age, race, gender. It didn't say sexual orientation.
Right. So now the EEOC, there's been some cases coming out for both transgender people and for gay people, saying that is arguably illegal, but it's EEOC decisions. They're suggestive for what a court would do, but they're not binding on federal
Equal
court.
Employment Opportunities Commission for the uninitiated.
I was just about to ask.
And the thing about it is, during the Obama administration, a more liberal interpretation was taken that sex meant sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, of course, with the new sheriff in town, it's not being interpreted that way. In fact, didn't he join the court? Didn't the administration join the court to be against those things? And there are, 3 cases?
So what happened there?
Before the Supreme Court?
It's kind of interesting because Trump's Justice Department is actually arguing against their own EEOC decisions, which I've never seen before.
It's crazy.
It's like upside down and sideways.
What's always killed me about the issue is the protecting people from being fired based on sexual orientation is a fundamental conservative value. And the reason is the work ethic. The fundamental conservatism should certainly be in favor of the work ethic.
Right.
You work hard, you get ahead. And there shouldn't be a footnote saying, if you work hard, you get ahead, unless you're gay or transgender.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of folks that work hard, get ahead, have 7 3/4 kids, and that's it. But then
what infuriates me is it's the gift that keeps on giving. If you lose your job because you're gay and you were doing a good job, what do you tell your next employer when you're applying for that job and they say, why aren't you working there anymore? Do you lie and do you leave it off your resume?
Do you say I screwed up?
Or say you screw up, or say, oh, I got fired because I'm gay, in which case maybe they don't hire you because you're gay. So then we have one more person who can't find a job and is going to be on the public dole when they're perfectly willing and ready and able to work. I met with Shabbat years ago about that.
Steve, the congressman.
Years ago, because we were trying to get him, I know this is tilting at windmills, but we were trying to get him to be supportive of a federal non-discrimination law. And that's exactly the argument I presented to him is, in what conservative world does that benefit anyone to have someone who's ready, willing, and able to work fired for something that has nothing to do with their job?
And be forced to sit home and take...
I know Rob Portman's been better on some of those issues.
Because
his son is gay.
His son,
That I guess I'm being infuriated because that
it's okay.
Me too, because I thought, oh, my ox gored? Really? I care now. Okay.
Yeah, calm down. You have dinner reservations after this.
That's right.
But this devil of a thing is now there are 3 cases coming up before the Supreme Court this fall that touch on this whole tension between sexual orientation and sex.
Yeah.
And God only knows. Any predictions?
With the Supreme Court, that's hard to predict. The argument is that sexual orientation should be covered because it's sex discrimination. It's based on this Price Waterhouse case where a woman was too mannish for her bosses, so she wasn't being promoted, and the Supreme Court said that was sex discrimination because she wasn't fitting the sexual stereotype of the dainty woman she was supposed to be.
Okay.
That applies directly to sexual orientation and to transgender status. You're being discriminated against because you're not meeting a stereotype your boss has for you.
Right.
And there's use that kind of that's thinking anyone who's different at work can be fired. I mean, it's subjective too. It's
well,
like
those
just
things then touch. You have the state laws, which are the so-called at-will. You want to explain at-will? I think you sort of did.
Yeah, at-will is what Ohio and most states are, that you can be fired for any reason. You're an employee at-will. You can be fired for any reason that's not illegal discrimination.
So long as it isn't based on religion and those so-called touchstones of
right.
But how do you prove anything that's on the books that you got fired because of
sometimes it's obvious. If they only fired out of a group of people, if they only fired people above 70 years old.
Okay.
So you can read it in sometimes.
So this is the reason if you want to piece this whole thing, you've got federal, you have state.
Yeah, and local.
And local,
we do have a local ordinance in Cincinnati, the Human Rights Ordinance, which was hard fought to get in. And a lot of people think it's useless because there's never been a case filed under it. But I've used it many times to get people their job back, or more often to get a severance package for someone. So if someone's fired because they're gay within the city limits of Cincinnati, it gives you a tool to go to the employer and say, this is illegal, and we'll file on it if you don't. Usually people don't want to go back to work where they're hated. So what they want usually is a severance package. And part of that, which is critical, is an agreed to severance letter saying, we love this guy, he did a great job.
A recommendation
absolutely, because then you can get that next job. So what we usually go for is money and
a letter.
And a letter.
So, this brings up the piece of why was it that certain companies, way ahead of any federal, state, or local legislation, include sexual orientation in their non-discrimination policy.
You're a P&G guy. What do you think?
Yeah,
well,
what happened in 1992?
Why do you think activists, and they're not talking about Mike Chanak, there are plenty of people throughout this country. P&G was one of the first, but actually I think AT&T was a lot earlier. So P&G was in the top tier. But how do you affect change when all the laws are against you? You do whatever you can.
Yeah.
So you. Right, I was going to say. So if you don't have recourse within the law, you have other recourse going through your social channels and business channels.
Sure. So how'd you do it? Did you make enough noise?
For me.
Right.
Actually,
policy.
When in those days it was all said and done for P&G, it ultimately really was a business decision because first of all, as time marched on, more and more of the college campuses and vendors that they dealt with had a requirement of non-discrimination, which many nonprofit colleges certainly do have. Many for-profit enterprises do now. They had to write a letter of compliance to do business with certain vendors and certain campuses that they were not discriminating against all the categories. So that was taking time and money. The other thing is, there's nothing like selling to a group of people you can't claim in your non-discrimination policy.
Right. Because that happened, right?
That is exactly what happened, and that was the driver. And that was my point at the work at P&G, and I'm sure others in other companies had similar points that eventually drove some of these changes. So in a lot of ways, that regardless of the, once a company, I'll tell you one thing about how corporations are a little different than the federal or the legislative thing. Once a policy is changed at a major corporation, those things are not reversed. You never hear. You never hear of an AT&T or a P&G saying, "Oh, sorry, we messed up on that gay issue."
Oh no. Well, and I was going to say, it's interesting with social media now and how powerful that is a voice for people to boycott things or share information about things that are discriminatory, and they can say, hey, these people are doing this. I think that just makes the social pressure so harsh on these companies
and
that they and they don't. I mean, is there a choice? I mean, can you?
Well, God bless the millennials. How often will you hear somebody say, "God bless the millennials" in my age band? But the truth of it is, the research indicates that millennials, unlike us old folks, we wanted value and we wanted quality. We didn't care so much about the social values of the corporations we did business with in the 50s or 60s. Young people today expect corporations to not only be a good price and a good quality product, they're also expecting that the corporation share their social values of equality. And, P&G and every other corporation who's smart recognizes that it sells product. There's a reason for those ads for Trans Man and Gillette, and the latest one that they put out during Pride Week for Pantene. There's been some real blockbusters making it very clear where they stand on the issue. Now, I will also say it isn't all make-believe. Because of the Words Matter and the second film, Out of the Shadows, that P&G did on the workplace here recently, I've had an opportunity to meet the head of P&G, the head of diversity, and all those folks, and I can tell you it's pretty legit. And I didn't make a dime on it. So there you go.
Yeah, for folks who don't know, how can we see the film that you just referenced?
Certainly, if you just go onto YouTube or the internet and you put in The Words Matter, like hashtag The Words Matter, you'll certainly find the first one. The second one's a little newer, so you might have to put in Out of the Shadows P&G, and you'll find it.
They're both great, and they're both completely available online.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So both great films. How do we? So there's social media. There's millennials. I love it. How do you? If you don't go to the voting booth, how do you effectuate change? I mean, I know you can vote, but do you go on Facebook, make a group? Do you invite friends? Do an event?
Yeah, I think even beyond voting, that's to me, a bare minimum of what you do. I mean, what you do is you not only vote, you find out who the candidates are, and you get 15 friends to vote for them too and tell them why. It's something to go vote, but it's an absolute bare. You give money if you can. If you can't give money, you stuff envelopes and call a candidate that you really like and whose values are like yours and say, "What can I do? Can I go door to door?"
That's the beauty, not only of the PNG films, but I've been asked this 100 times. Well, what can we do? And I said, you guys, you came up in the internet era with the keyboard. I said, push away from the damn keyboard.
Yeah. Go out and knock on the door.
Liking a candidate on Facebook
doesn't make them
meaningless.
That might get you informed.
Well,
good for
a little
you.
bit.
Yeah. That's the problem with Facebook and this media. It's a silo, and you're talking to like-minded people. Well, that's fine, but you're not reaching beyond that group of people.
I think people need to be critical thinkers, and they need to think about what they're doing and is it making a difference. So, liking something on Facebook is interesting, but beyond that, they need to put their feet to the pavement, help someone, talk to their friends, and say, "Hey, did you see this candidate? I think she's great, and I think you should too. And here's why." And make sure you vote. And then to call them on, if you think they might not vote, call them on election day
and offer a ride and say,
did you vote yet? Well,
that kind of
get
thing.
your butt up and go do it.
It sounds like people need to be, as Ariel, one of the Grand Marshals, told us, be intentional with your actions.
Right.
Be part of.
Just kind of go.
Not just click service.
Right.
It used to be lip service. Now it's click service.
Right.
It's hard especially for people who feel disenfranchised. It's very hard to think, why am I going to bother? My life looks the same no matter who's in office. That's what you hear a lot.
Easy to give up.
It's very easy to give up, yeah.
But we don't. We shouldn't. We should stay informed. No, that's true. Thank you guys for being here, Scott and Michael. It was great. And for more info on the Words Matter and everything Michael's involved with at OutCincinnati.com.
I might say that Scott is in the second Out of the Shadows, so he is now a starlet.
My 30 seconds of fame.
He's following the Goose's. What do you call it?
Yes.
Thank you so much. You're listening to Out Cincinnati on 91.7 WVXU HD.